I am doing very well. Thank you for asking. How's this?
You know what happened? I scheduled this, and then what happened was I was supposed to go for dinner with my friends at like 5 o'clock, and the guy pushed it to 7, and then boom, I got your alert, and I was like, so I accidentally double booked myself, right? So I apologize. Anyways, I got a couple of minutes I could do. My friend is coming to pick me up, so if anything, you might hear me getting into a car.
That's okay. That's okay, man.
Okay.
You got to love the era we're in. We're mobile. You can do this on the move. And if we got to cut it short, that's fine, buddy. I understand you're a very busy man. And for everyone, you are recording right now, Marcus. For the guys who don't know what he was talking about, we were supposed to do this yesterday. Unforeseen circumstances put us off to today. And Marcus, by the sounds of it, almost had to bump it to tomorrow. But we're glad he didn't. Thank you, Marcus.
No problem.
So for those who don't know, those who've been sleeping under a rock, this is the man that brought us Delirium, the man that brought us Prophecy. It's still rocking in Lion Dub, Inner City Dance, Necessary Bass, and High Culture. One name that jumped out, like I had to look up your name just to make sure I got everyone, and a name that came out that I could not put anything to was Spaceballers. What is Spaceballers?
Oh, okay. You know what? Spaceballers actually wasn't my thing specifically. Basically that was, DJ Task?
Of course.
I don't know if you've ever, so that's DJ Task's like thing. And I had done some work with him, some remixes and so on. So basically, I guess, it would pop up because we did a few remixes. Also, I just wanted to point out High Culture was Benny Page's label, but obviously it had a release on there, and we've done quite a bit of work together, so.
Gotcha.
That would pop up. Yeah.
Understood. And to be honest, I didn't put two and two together. I should have known that before I said it. But yes,
no problem.
Big up, Mr. Page. What I wanted to ask you, I've got just a few questions to go through, Marcus.
Sure.
What was the last song you actually were listening to before we chatted right now?
Ooh, jeez. You know what? Actually, it was it was a Lee Morgan jazz documentary. Funny enough. So I listen to all sorts of music. So and I love podcasts. I'm big into podcasts. I was listening to a Giles Peterson podcast with Fabio just recently, which is amazing. You should all check it out if you get a chance. It's got so much history about the music and how things came to be, in England. Giles is amazing, so you should check it out.
I know the interview you're talking about. It's I believe a little over 2 hours long, and it is a very, very in-depth and very good interview. And I actually was turned on to it by looking at your Facebook page. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Right on, yeah.
What I want to ask you about Delirium and back in those days. What do you remember about back in those days? Like, what do you remember specifically about your first party?
Well, back then it was like, it really was more about, you would get a room. It was really do it yourself. So we would kind of, luckily we knew a sound company, because that was one of the main things. We all had sound crews, and so we used to rent sound systems, and we used to rent sound from this guy called Barry Booth. He had a shop called System Music Warehouse, I believe, in Pickering. He's still there, actually. And he rents sound to all the people in the East End. And he's, Jamaican parentage, so it was a Jamaican sound system, He had, by the time we had our third event, I think we had 36 bass bins at that show. And that was just for that one room. The party was called Lunatic Fringe, but in terms of all the lighting and stuff like that, it was just like whatever Barry had and whatever we could kind of get from friends. We all had a little bit of lights and stuff like that. It was more about just like basically having a dark room, really, really big sound, and a few lights here and there. It wasn't really so much about a light show at that point, we liked lasers, and funny enough, I hated strobes, but people always owned them, so we'd have some strobes and stuff. But yeah, it was really bare bones, and to be honest with you, a lot of the earliest parties were, people, there's like this mystique about the early days, about it being so amazing, but when we used to go to Psychosis parties, sometimes it would be like 10 of us. So it was like a long time before we had so many events, like before things actually took off. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's a big misconception because people think the old days, and I mean the old days for a lot of people are when it are already taken off and there were thousands and thousands of people, but that didn't really start until about 94, you know? So from like 1990 to 94, it was a real building process. And I mean, there was like hundreds of parties, right? But it was like literally a small building process. Like I remember when we started first to get like 100, 200 people, and a big party was 1,000 people. A big party, you know?
Yeah.
So
it's interesting to hear you say it, Marcus, because I myself cannot say I was around in 94. I was in grade 4 in 94.
right.
But in my beginning days, it was still a lot rawer than it is today. And I can empathize, I guess, with the comment that people like the old days. They'll say that. And the thing I say is, well, people are actually eating nowadays. You know, in the old days, people weren't eating. They were working day jobs and then doing what they could to try and make a career out of making music. And now there's actually people like yourself who can say that they've made a living out of making music, and that's only possible because of the growth of the culture. So I don't want the old days, and it's refreshing to hear yourself who's speaking from experience that I cannot come from.
Well, you know what? One of the things that is happening though, which is actually really interesting now, is like since we went through the big EDM boom, the one thing that people are craving, and you know, a lot of kids always ask me, they say, well, what was it like, you know? And then we've thrown some events where it's really dark, and you know, and we have like the one light and the focus is the music, right?
Yep.
So we've been starting to have more events like that, and the younger crowd is starting to say, you know what, this is what it's about. So it's really funny how it's come full circle. We have a party called Wax on Saturday, and it's all jungle vinyl, and a lot of the younger kids are now starting to be like, hey, I want to know what this music is about, right? That original flavor. So, but I think what they're really liking is just the bare bones of it, you know? And I'm happy for that, because I think it got a bit too much about the light show and, you know, all these other things that really didn't contribute to the vibe of the party, you know?
The extracurriculars.
Yeah, sorry.
No,
I'm sorry, I'm outside.
No. I totally understand what you mean, Marcus. Yeah, it's like I say, it's also refreshing to hear your description of your first party versus a lot of other people's. When they start talking about what they remember of the beginning of the scene, it has nothing to do with helping the growth or promotion of an industry or a culture. It's about an inebriated blackout party they were at, and that's not what we want to hear. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That actually brings me into the next question. Do you remember I got to lead into this. Being a part of the 94, 95, 96, you were a part of the birth of jungle drum and bass. You were a part of the birth of what I would consider the happy hardcore or the hardcore genre as it blended into what we call today's jungle drum and bass. Do you remember the first song that you heard that you could call jungle drum and bass music?
Well, you know, I used to listen to this show called Radio London, and it was hosted by Malik X. And funny enough, there was a big, at the time it was like rare groove and soul music revival, you know, so like Soul to Soul was really big, and at their parties they were pushing like, you know, listening to like James Brown and then really obscure soul music. So I was really into that stuff because I grew up on soul. And at the time, I was playing everything at parties. Like, we were playing hip-hop, we were playing house, we were playing techno, right? And it was all about playing everything. It was just dance music. That's what it was, right? Mm-hmm. So when I started listening to Malik's show, he was talking, he's from England, and, you know, obviously the whole acid house thing was happening in the late 80s in England. And you know, he was talking, the first time I ever heard the word rave, it was him talking about, you know, they're having a rave down at, like, the Claremont House with Mark Oliver and himself and Dr. No and so on. But really and truly what he was referring to at the time was they'd go down there and they were playing, like, rare groove and soul and early house, you know? But then as it grew, the very first raga that I heard, because what was happening in England was there was the acid house scene, and then it started to kind of, because there's such a big Jamaican population in England, they started to mix reggae with the techno and the acid house, right? So basically, what they were doing, they're just taking an acid house track and basically adding some sub bass, usually in a reggae fashion, to the acid, and it was still 4 on the floor. And then they were adding raga samples, and I remember him playing Raga Twins on "Shut Up and Dance," right? And funny enough, I heard, I think it was Deadly Headley, I think it was, yeah. He was playing early Rebel MC stuff, and I was already really into the Rebel MC stuff because in the late 80s, Rebel MC he's making stuff that was like proto-jungle. It was like, it would have amens at a hip-hop tempo, and he would have raga samples, like full-on reggae loops, and then he was rapping in a British accent over it. So, I mean, for me, Rebel MC, funny enough, like, he really kind of pioneered the whole thing well before everyone was even thinking about it, right? And then it started to really catch on, you know, as 1990, 1991. By 92, we had our party called Lost in the Jungle. We were already calling the music jungle, you know, and that was still in the hardcore phase from between 1991 and 94, right? So a lot of people get confused when you say hardcore, right? What we were referring to hardcore is like, it was like hardcore jungle techno, right? So it had the pianos, it had the raga samples, it had the break beats. So it wasn't just all 4 on the floor happy hardcore, right? That came later, when things got like divided. The seed divided up a little bit. When jungle became jungle, the people who just wanted to hear pianos and 4 to the floor, they created the happy hardcore scene, you know? And it branched off of guys like Psy and Dougal, and, you know, a few other guys went that way as well. But then the jungle scene, all the guys who were playing hardcore, they just started playing jungle. And then, you know, so jungle had like Dark Side and all these other genres grew, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I apologize, I'm going off on a tangent here.
No, I love it. I love it. That's why we record and we do not write, Marcus. That's why we do this audio. But okay, that leads into another great question, which I'm sure you've been asked before. What is the difference to you between drum and bass versus jungle? The two terms.
Well, I see, that's a tricky question. Like, really and truly, it just comes down to the vibe, I would say. Obviously there were 2 distinct periods, right? So you started to get like the whole jungle thing really surfacing like in 92, and obviously right through to 95, right? So the main turn was over in England. Things were getting a little bit violent because, you know, the gangsters were coming into the scene, and basically, a lot of the main DJs kind of got together and said, listen, you know what, we're going to lose this whole thing if we don't change it. And, you know, people like Goldie and, you know, Groove Rider and Fabio and all these, they made the decision to say, hey, you know what, we're going to call this drum and bass, otherwise we're going to lose the whole thing, you know? So some guys were still making technically what you would call jungle, right? But they had to kind of call it something else. So even if you went to Metalheads and you saw Digital or you saw Dillinger, you were going to get a jungle flavor, but they called it drum and bass out of kind of like the necessity to save the music, you know, because there was a time in England where you couldn't even get a club to do a jungle party, right? Because if you said jungle, they were like, no way, right? And it's kind of the same thing happened with UK Garage and Grime, right? Because of the criminal element, right? So you have like the gangsters and the mob basically trying to make money and bringing in violence, I guess you could say, right? And the funny thing is, when we were going through the change with them, kids over here were really like sad because, you know, by 95, they started to replace all the raga samples with hip hop samples, right? And the music, the flavor started to change, and then they took the hip hop samples out, and they really stripped it back to like, and they went dark actually, to kind of like, I guess you could say, get rid of the people that were bringing in like the violence and stuff like that. But over here, you know, culturally, it was like 98% white people, right? White kids, so they didn't understand. The kids were like, yo, we like jungle. So we didn't have an understanding. So sometimes I had a conversation with a few people from England, and they were just like, "You don't get it. You don't know how dark it is over in England, like how bad things are for us, right? We were fighting for jungle, you know, and then Rebel MC put out Junglist as a response to what was happening, and then he dipped because, you know, he was all about jungle, and they turned it into drum and bass. He took some time out after that whole thing because the scene really did get shut down over there, you know. Like laws were implemented and police were cracking down on all the shows. Yeah, a lot of people don't talk about it, but that's really what happened in the transition between drum and bass and jungle.
Well, you know, one person who I think touched down on it was Stevie Hyper D. And when you listen to what he brought to the rave scene and the culture he came, a lot of the harder ruffian type guys I remember would listen to some of the lyrics and thought they were too Candy-esque. I think you'd say too plurry. And I to be honest, I didn't understand it either. Like you say, I'm a white guy listening to jungle in Toronto. I didn't get why we needed to be so bubbly and lovey. But hearing this side of the culture, which I've heard others talk about, is enlightening, and it gives a bit of an understanding as to the darker side of where the jungle came from. But the thing I find interesting most in what you just said, Marcus, is I've always thought of this question as a more objective or open to discussion topic, whereas what you're telling me, no, there's an answer to this. This is actually about a transition based on culture.
Yes, I mean, at the time, I was one of those people who was really against it. I kept playing jungle, and all my friends could tell you I played jungle right through, you know. And then in 1997, a lot of our friends over in England who were making jungle, they started making UK garage, and that was a sound that I really, really got into as well. And I actually started a company called Flirt with Sasa Lee and this guy named Tony Matheru. We started Flirt because really and truly what was happening was, you know, I remember Shy FX came over in 97, and he was really into garage at the time as well. The whole jungle community in England basically had just went from jungle over to the UK garage scene, right? Because garage, it didn't have a blemish at the time, and basically all of the elements that were in jungle went into garage. So they basically slowed the music down to house tempo, they put the breaks in there, and they still had like the raga, the soul, all the R&B elements, right? But at the same time, even though we had Flirt, I was still playing drum and bass like on a regular basis. The two scenes didn't intersect, you know. Wow. And they still don't now. Like we have this company called Bump, and I've been doing it for 4 years with a crew of mine, and basically the two scenes don't intersect, you know what I mean? Because one's more on the UK house, UK sound system side of things, and then drum and bass is really its own thing. But I was gonna say, like, right now the music is at its healthiest point because jungle is back full swing, right? And jungle is really now a part of drum and bass culture, you know. It's a flavor within drum and bass. So you got guys like Chimpo and Sam Binga, and then you've got the whole jungle scene with, like, you know, Chopstick and Aries and all those guys. Then you've got all the old school guys like Terry T and Devious D, and so many labels. All the original jungle labels pretty much are back now. You know, Cool Hand Flex is back. He's been doing his thing with Randall. Kemet is back. Potential Bad Boy is super active. So it's like at its healthiest point. I think once they got rid of that whole criminal element of things, drum and bass and jungle now, it's like people are not, it's lost the stigma. So, you know, you've got all these companies like Jungle Jam, you've got the Jungle Awards, you've got Rumble in the Jungle, and so when you have those parties, when the police see those names and they're at really legitimate clubs, you know, like Fabric does Jungle Jam, and, you know, they just had Jungle Fever at Ministry of Sound. Like, they're not making that link anymore. You know what I mean? They don't associate it with badness, you know? So it's really progressive for the music, and right now things are super healthy because you've got all these flavors. You've got drum and bass that sounds like rock, just straight up rock and roll. You know, you've got drum and bass that sounds like pop, like Justin Bieber stuff, and then you've got Raga Jungle, Dark Side, and it makes the music interesting. And for me, and I, you know, Lush, I'm actually with Lush right now. We just choose the best of every genre, subgenre, and we play that all together because that's what we've always been about. It's just like, if you have a set of music, if you have a set and you can take people on a journey playing all these different flavors, that was what the original thing was about in the first place. So it's kind of gone full circle, you know?
Yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying, Marcus.
Yeah.
Well, hey, if you're with Brad, I do have more questions, but we've already gone over 20 minutes, and I know you have a night ahead of you, so I don't want to. You're okay to chat maybe again in maybe a month or so. I'll get you back on. And
dude, I would love to, and I apologize for doing the double booking thing.
No, it's okay.
It was these dinner plans got moved up, so
it's all good.
I
Please
want to big up all your listeners and thank you guys for listening. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Marcus. Please tell Brad we say hello, and good luck. And we'll talk to you soon. Okay.
All right. All the best.
All right. Take care, sir.
Take care. Bye.
All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. Marcus, thank you for coming on the show. This is going to be the beginning of a new segment I'm doing. I really want to focus in on our drum and bass community. I do believe, like he said, it is growing. Peter, you have a great movie coming out soon, and I'm so glad you did it, man. Kudos to you for taking the initiative and actually doing it. We all sit here and we wonder they should really blank, or someone should really da-da-da. But nobody does it. Just do it, man. No harm will be done. Thank you once again, Marcus. I love you for coming on my show. We were going to delay this, but that was just too much fun. I'm going to go ahead and share it right now. I've got another interview I'm doing tomorrow with somebody and another one next week. We've got drum and bass people lined up for the next little while. In between these segments, I will be doing normal Running Errands podcast, but I hope you guys enjoy these as well. So until the next one, as always, guys, peace out.